Miss Eurasia. Okay, so everybody, I hope you did your hair and your outfit today because we're now being recorded. Luckily, I put a little makeup on before we got started. We're good. All right. Let's see what else. All right, yes, one class you missed. No. Okay, so some people are new and some people not so much. All right. Well, I'm glad again to have everybody here. Yes, took a class before. Awesome. Okay. All right, so let's start with this slide. I never like to waste a slide. None of them are just throwaways. Let's take a look at this image. This map is made in, I believe the year is 1513. And when we're talking about some of the monumental changes that take place in the world post 1492, I love this map. This map was made, believe it or not, by Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, I don't often think of da Vinci as somebody who's focused on the New World, the world beyond the Atlantic, but by 1513 or so, people are becoming more and more aware of this unknown territory. It's not Asia. Everybody is aware of that at that time. And they're trying to piece together, what in the world do we have here? What have we encountered? And look what Da Vinci has. It's quite fascinating. There's so many things to take apart here. One of the things that, of course, stands out to me is this. It is America. So what I want to first show everybody is that by about 1513 or so, people are already calling this new land America. Obviously, by looking at this, it looks nothing like what we really have. Does anybody see anything that really strikes you about this map? And you can look anywhere on it at things that intrigue you. Don't worry about just where I pointed to. Does anyone see anything here that is like, wow, 1513, they were thinking this, they were thinking that. I know what that thing is. I understand what do you see here that's intriguing to you? I'm looking at the messages. Okay, so Jacqueline is asking what's at the top, Patty, mountains along the bottom. Let's see, poles. Okay, and let me just check and see one other thing here. Okay, Maurice, I'm looking to see what, did you send me another message on here? I'm looking. Okay, all right. So let's see. So the first question I'm seeing is what's at the top. Let's take a look at this. So notice this name up here. This is Cathay. Does anyone know what Cathay means or where that's coming from? What is Cathay? Another way to say it, by the way, would be cafe. Anybody? Oh, the messages keep coming in here. I can't even keep up. Okay, awesome. Yeah, China. So Cathay is the name that Marco Polo in the 1200s used for China. So it's interesting how Da Vinci is actually placing it in a fairly accurate way. He's not connecting it to America. For a while, people had no clue if America ended and Cathay began. They didn't know about the Pacific, but by now he's showing that he understands that there is a Pacific Ocean. Okay, so China is not so bad considering. Let's see some other places. This one, this is probably a mythical place. Nobody at that time would have been up that far north. So this is going to be a big mystery that he's, conjecturing about the north. The same is going on down here. There is no one in Europe or any place else on planet Earth that is going to be aware of Antarctica in the 1500s. Antarctica is not going to be known until 1820, believe it or not, much more modern times. So this is more conjecture. And this is a good time actually to mention an incredible idea that carried forward from the time of Aristotle, okay? Aristotle was around in the 300s BCE. He's a brilliant observer, a brilliant scientist, of course. One of the things that he said, many things, by the way, that were extremely accurate that we know today are true. He knew that the earth was a sphere. He understood some ideas of gravity and such. He was amazing, but he had no way to know at that time that the Earth was not the center of the universe. So he held on to this belief that the Earth is in the center of the universe. Because if you observe the sun, it looks like the sun is revolving around us, right? So here's what he says. And it relates to what's going on this map. And it also actually relates to a lot of what's going to happen through the age of exploration. Aristotle, in about 300 or so BCE, says, because the Earth is at the center of the universe, there must be equal land in the north than in the south. Because if we don't have that, if we don't have a balance of land in the north and the south, northern and southern hemispheres, the Earth is going to topple off. This is what keeps us in place so that the entire universe can revolve around us. So because of that, map makers, even into the 1500s, believe it or not, even into the 1700s, were still committed to the idea that there has to be more land down here than actually exists. So this is part of that magical, mythical land. It's not Antarctica that everyone thinks is existing to keep the Earth in balance. But one thing I'll say is that in 1492, with the understanding of South America and then later North America, people are going to start to have a better view of what actually exists. And it certainly doesn't include some massive, massive landmass down here to balance what we have in the north. So the ball starts rolling, so to speak, in 1492, but it's going to take several centuries for it to really kick in. So let's take a look at a few other things that people have written down here. So with China, they had a sense of the size of South America because they could sail around the bottom, but no sense of the size of North America. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So what's going on over here is actually his view of South America. You're absolutely right about not really knowing much about North America. If you look at this island, do you see what it says? It says Terra Florida. So as far as Da Vinci is concerned, this is Florida. He's not understanding anything of the shapes and such. He doesn't know the rest of North America. He knows this little blob over here. That's it. The rest of this is actually Central America and South America. That's what, in his mind, is what the New World is. So it's a very interesting way of seeing what they thought at the time, or at least what he thought, compared to what will develop later on. Okay, let's see a few other comments here. Seems like the oceans are determined separate as tidal differently. Yeah, that's a great point. So another thing going on is that by the early 1500s, something new has been understood, and that's the Pacific Ocean. So until about that time, nobody was sure what was going on here. At first, they thought that this area was connected to here, but it's only with efforts like Balboa and Magellan and some others that this was understood to be a separate ocean and that the Americas were separate from Asia. So things are sort of shaping up, but it's going to take some time. And let's see some other questions here. So somebody asked about the Appalachians. So these wouldn't be the Appalachians. The Appalachians would be up here. But this shows you how little was known of our part of the world at that time. It's just like a blob again. This is South America. So these would have been the Andes. So there was some vague idea of the Andes coming down the coast of South America. And this bulge, I'm assuming, is Brazil. And of course, we have the Caribbean over here. This looks like Hispaniola. So that would be the Dominican Republic and Haiti right over here. Okay. So let's see what else. I'm seeing some other questions going on here. I love them. Keep them coming. Question: is there an equivalent map of the Eastern Hemisphere? And if so, is it more accurate? I don't know if Da Vinci made a map like that. but the maps of the Eastern Hemisphere in the early 1500s would have been incredibly accurate compared to this. The things that would have been missing, though, in the 1500s on an Eastern Hemisphere map would be Australia and probably some of the islands in the Pacific that were still not going to be encountered. But if we're thinking of the mainland areas like Southeast Asia and East Asia and South Asia, a lot of that is really filling in pretty decently by the 1500s because of the Europeans reaching those areas. And this brings us back to one of the main points of 1492. And it always comes back to Asia, actually, that in 1492, European powers were desperate to find ways to get to Cathay, China, and also areas that were still vague on this map, Southeast Asia, because places like that had the luxury items that they wanted, and they wanted to control the trade routes. That's why Columbus did what he did. So he's coming across from the Iberian Peninsula, and he's hoping that this land would be right around over here. And if Spain is the one that can find the easiest route there, Spain is going to monopolize these incredibly valuable trade routes. Usually economics is the driving force for lots of the expeditions that are going on in the 1400s. There are going to be some other, fringe situations like converting people, dominion, glory, and such power, but economics is going to be really the driving force that's going to convince the kings and queens to put in the expense of having people go on these journeys. Okay, so let's see what else. Interesting that there are longitude lines. That is really interesting because there really was no way. That's a great point. Fascinating point. At that time, there was no way to calculate longitude. So let's talk about that. I'm assuming that the longitude lines are there, and I'm thinking about this for a second. There actually were longitude lines on maps even made during the Roman Empire. There's a geographer by the name of Ptolemy, who you may have heard of. He lived in about, I'm going to say about 100 CE, AD CE, okay? He was a master geographer, and the maps that he made actually showed longitude lines, and he made the Canary Islands the prime meridian, 0 degrees. The problem with these maps, though, and using longitude is that there was no way for people to accurately calculate them. So ideally, it was great to have them on the map because, sure, having a grid system makes sense. But if you're out on the open ocean in the Atlantic, you had literally no exact way to measure where you are east-west. Imagine that as these voyages began oceanic, transoceanic. There are probably so many of them that we don't know about because they just never made it. Because it's very easy, of course, to just go off track, off course, and you're done. Latitude was no. Latitude was something that could be calculated even in ancient times because we have the Big Dipper and the North Star and the horizon and sun and the angles and such. So that was something that people could use to understand their north-south position, but they did not know accurate longitude until, get ready for this. I'm going to put it in here, so stay tuned. I'm typing this one in. Hang on one sec. I want to make sure everybody sees it. Here we go. This is approximately when longitude is finally going to be figured out. 1800. Can you imagine this? It's only in recent times. It's like what, 120, no, 200, sorry, 200. I'm living in 1920 right now for some reason. About 200 years ago, that's when longitude was finally perfected. So all of this stuff that's happening in 1492 is really like a needle in a haystack for people to actually make it even remotely to places that they thought they were trying to get to. And then, of course, comes the size of the Earth. And at the time of Columbus, many people thought that the Earth was much smaller than it was. And they also believed that there was more land mass than there was ocean. Now, this is already looking much better, as somebody pointed out. The oceans are looking really, they're shaping up. They're looking pretty accurate. But if we go back to 1492, Columbus totally understood that the Earth was a sphere. That was something that was well known to people for centuries, centuries and centuries, surprising to a lot of people. But he thought that the Earth was a lot smaller than it is. And again, he thought that the land masses covered most of it. So it was a very different perception of things. And of course, if you think of it that way, it makes a lot more sense that you're going to leave Spain and you're going to be able to get to Asia, right? There's not that much ocean. And there it is, because the Earth is a lot smaller than we really know that it is today. So yeah, and yes, the equator is there. So they would have completely understood in 1492 the idea of latitude and the equator and such. And again, going back to what we were saying before, the belief was, going back to Aristotle, that whatever is in the north has to be in the south. So whatever land masses you have up here, the equal amount has to be down here, or the Earth will topple off. And you're not going to be able, you can't be the center of the universe if you don't have that balance. So that's why we have some of these extra things built in down here instead. Today, we know that most of the land masses on planet Earth are actually in the northern hemisphere, not the south. Anybody have other questions on this before we move on? Or just put them in and I'll keep going. And as things come up, you just let us know. This is another map. So if we're talking about 1492 and some of the effects that it's going to have, they are huge. Some of them will take time for the world to absorb, because when something big happens, it usually is going to really take time to seep into the consciousness of the world. But in 1507, so this is only about 15 years later than Columbus's first kind of blunder into the Americas. By 1507, this is a map that's very, very significant because it's showing South America actually in some ways much more accurately than the information that Da Vinci had. So Da Vinci obviously did not have, a monopoly on information. There were others that had it quite a bit more accurate before him. So now let's look and see what we've got here. This is North America. This is the coast of North America. This would very likely be Florida. Here's the Caribbean. And this is Mexico. And it's extending. And I don't know if that's connected or not. I think they were dreaming that it wasn't. But there's Central America coming down to South America. Now, the interesting thing about this map, you can't see it on here. It's kind of fuzzy. But I'm circling over here something which really propelled us to the place name we now have for North and South America. Right here, it says America. So by this time, something else happened besides Columbus coming to this area, or someone else happened to come to this area. It's Amerigo Vespucci, because the Americas are named for that navigator. So here's America, very kind of innocuously put on this map, and the name is going to stick. So you can see that by the time Da Vinci makes his map, there it is. That's the name that everyone's starting to use, and it's going to continue on. Does anyone possibly have an explanation as to why Da Vinci would have approved, he would have liked the name America, why he would have liked the name America? And it may have to do with ethnicity, actually. Yeah, I mean, Columbus was from Italy too, but Columbus was so connected to the Spaniards that some people didn't, look as kindly to him as they might have Amerigo Vespucci. It was an Italian name, and so there we go. The other thing is that Amerigo Vespucci was very much a humanist, Okay, so this is getting more into kind of like the intellectual milieu of what's going on in 1492. He was a humanist. He was somebody who was raised in classical ideas, ideas coming from the ancient world. And of course, uh, somebody like Da Vinci would have very much been like that too. He was basically a Renaissance man looking at old texts, ancient texts and such. So people really like the fact that a humanist, a Renaissance man, was the one that was coming along the coast. Columbus, not so much, but Vespucci fit that character of what people were looking for as kind of like, you know, an educated, cool guy at the time, because he was also a humanist. So that's another interesting side factor as to what's going on. Now, talking about Asia, before I was saying Asia looks a lot better, that's going to happen down the road a little bit. In 1507, things are still kind of a mess. So what's going on in this map is that we still have vestiges of old ideas of geography coming forth. And it's interesting to look at this map because there are new ideas coming about, but there are also some old ideas, and they're coming together into one map. And I would say in 1507, in many ways, it is like the theme of this, when worlds collided. So we have the collision of new ideas with older ideas. Some of these ideas actually go back to, again, Ptolemy, that map maker, that geographer from the Roman Empire. In the late 1400s, people in Western Europe are very much looking at ancient texts. They're humanists looking at ancient texts in order to get their information. And at first they thought it was like the gospel. This is what they write, must be the way it is. So Ptolemy's ideas of geography going back to like 100 CE are still playing into some of the maps. Was a theory that he had called the dragon's tail going on in this part of Asia. It's still on a map in 1507. But we also have some very new ideas too. This also is not quite right. This is something that Ptolemy was talking about. And I'm really amazed that this made it onto a map, because by then, I mean, this was a major thoroughfare, but people were sticking and holding on to the past as the present started to emerge. So I love this map because both worlds do collide right here in the map. And actually, I'm looking for two figures. Gosh, this is not that clear. Oh, there they are. Okay, I found him. Oh, there he is. Okay, so it's probably a little hard to make this out, but do you see that there are two people up here? Okay, if you look carefully, you might notice the name of this one. This is Vespucci. This is Amerigo Vespucci, okay? This one, tougher to see, this is Ptolemy, all right? So what they're showing is that he's gazing at the old world. The old world, here it is, represented, these continents. And Vespucci is gazing at this new world, and it's all starting to come together. So this was quite a time intellectually, scientifically, geographically, unbelievable, demographically, you name it. And people probably did not realize at first how monumental the changes are going to be after 1492. But little by little, the ripple effects are going to, emanate, and they affect us today. It's the world that we're living in today. So let me see what some of the questions here are. All right. So let's go to Jacqueline. Did they ever think of Italy at that time? Yes. So Italy in the 1400s were separate city-states. They were papal states and other city-states. It was not a united Italy. Even if people spoke basically same languages, it was not united. In fact, the two major forces at that time on the peninsula would have been Genoa and Venice. Those are the two major trade forces, trade emporiums, and they would fight. They had wars with each other to compete with the trade routes, some of which would be to have access to the goods from the East. So this idea of the East of Asia and the goods that came from there is so important to the story, because the folks here wanted to be the conduit to bring those goods to Europe. And anyone who could find the best way to do that would end up prevailing, would be the wealthy ones, the ones in control. Eventually, by the way, Italy is going to kind of diminish in its power, in its influence. So during the Middle Ages, this little peninsula over here is going to be the conduit to bring those goods from here to here. They were preeminent in the Mediterranean and in connecting to the Eastern world. But as this part of the world right here, the Iberian Peninsula, starts to emerge in the 1400s to find other routes to compete with them, that's when they're going to diminish, because in their quest to try to get here, they also find out about this, and the Portuguese are going to figure out a way to bypass the usurious practices of Venice and also of Genoa. They're going to come around Africa, and they're going to make contact with these places themselves for the very first time. And one other thing I want to say is that Venice and Genoa never directly got to the East. I mean, there might have been individuals that did, like Marco Polo and such, but they didn't have direct trade with the East. It was many middlemen that would bring the goods to the Mediterranean. And typically they would come up the Red Sea to Alexandria and so on. So the prices, by the time they got to the Western Europeans, was insanely increased. That's part of the reason why the Iberians wanted to find their own direct route. Again, money is a huge motivator in everything that went on. Okay, so I don't see any other comments or questions now, so I'll go on and let's look at a few other things here. I'm just getting my chat down so that, oh, I do see that there's somebody else who wrote something in here. Let's see. It seems that they were more focused on exploration of the southern hemisphere rather than wandering into the northern regions. Also, it's interesting that the map is drawn with Europe and Africa as the center of the globe. That's interesting. All right, so let's look at the first comment. So that's they were more focused on the southern hemisphere rather than wandering into the north. Okay, so 1507, I'm trying to think of the context of this. So in 1507, some of the major discoveries are going to be going into the south. Yes. So the Iberians, the Portuguese, and the Spaniards are focused on going either across, and that would be the Spaniards. They're going basically across, and they get to the Bahamas and the Caribbean. Yep. And the Portuguese, because of where their location is, right on the Atlantic, and they're so close to Africa, they have reasons to go around Africa. One of those reasons is that Africa is a very prosperous, parts of Africa are very prosperous, and there's much gold, there's much salt, and other things that the Portuguese are interested in. Unfortunately, one will end up being slaves as well, that they saw this as a place that they wanted to get a stronghold on. They didn't have that because most of the trade routes through the Sahara were controlled by different tribes that were in Africa, from North Africa or even from Southern Africa or from Central Africa. So what the Portuguese wanted to do was to either penetrate this way, which they were not successful doing, or to at least come around and set up a trade relationship with the Africans, with various African groups like in Timbuktu and such. While they did that, they also crept along little by little until they made it all the way around. So that's part of the reason why this was emphasized. That was emphasized, and this was emphasized. The Portuguese already had interest not just in getting to Asia, but in getting to Africa as well. The Spaniards not as much to Africa because that was already getting claimed by the Portuguese. So their idea was, we want to get across here. This would be the easiest of all. If Asia's right here, we don't have to round Africa and do all that. We'll do this shortcut. It might be a little scary because we have to go in the open ocean, but we'll be able to get there sooner. Why wasn't the North particularly emphasized at that time? Well, those are the reasons for the Spaniards and the Portuguese. But later, the British are really going to get in on the act, and they are going to try their best to get through to Asia this way. So they didn't, this is mainly going to happen a little bit later than this, but there are going to be many other Europeans that are going to start to figure out what's going on up here because they want to break through to get here. So it wasn't to explore this just to find out about North America. It was to figure out a shortcut through it to get to Asia. So that will happen later, and it will be mainly the British, although the French are going to try. And I'm trying to think of what the Portuguese are going to try up there, and none of those really will end up working out. So this becomes one of the major ways to do it. Another thing I want to throw in while I think about it is that the British, let's see, that would be over here. So the British were also thinking, when they heard about what Columbus was able to do in getting to America and such, and what the Portuguese were doing, they said, wait a minute, maybe we've got our own way to get to Asia. And one way, sure, could be going this way up here into the North Atlantic, but who knows, maybe, possibly, we can go up and around this way and swing around. So they were hoping that this would be navigable. And there's an explorer that we've all heard of that actually first went this way. He got blocked in by ice just about over here. He then turned around without even going back to England and started to do some reconnaissance over here. Does anybody know who that is? I'll give you a clue. 1600s. He sails for the Dutch, and he also sails for England. So his first voyage was for England, and because he went off on his own, they got really annoyed with him, and then he sailed for the Dutch, and then he ultimately sailed for the British as well. But he went this way, said, no good, I'm going to go here before I go back. Hudson, that's it. Okay, not Magellan. Magellan's going to head down in that direction for the Spanish, but let's see about Hudson. You got it. So Hudson is it. So Henry Hudson was actually doing that. He was going northward in order to figure out if there was a way to get here. He went in this direction. No way, wasn't going to happen. Frozen, impossible. He turned around, and on his own, he went this way. And then the British got really angry that he did that without their authorization. So they said, we're not hiring you again. He then went for the Dutch, ended up in the Hudson River, and that's why it became claimed by the Dutch. New York and such became claimed by the Dutch. And then the British commissioned him. They said, oh, wait a minute, this is, maybe we should get this guy again. And he ended up doing a third voyage up here to try to figure out that route to Asia. And that's when he went into what we call today Hudson Bay. When he went to Hudson Bay, he really, really was working hard to try and get through to Asia. Couldn't do it. There was a mutiny, and you may know what ended up happening to him. He got stranded. They left him in James Bay, which is the southern part of Hudson Bay, never to be heard from again. So getting back to what we were talking about the Northern Hemisphere, yeah, there's going to be a lot of interest in that, but that's going to come later. At this point, it's going to be more of a focus on what the Spanish are doing and what the Portuguese are doing. Another thing I want to say is that any of these map makers had very limited knowledge. So these map makers were focused on Vespucci and Columbus and such, not so much on what's happening in Northern Europe. But other map makers are going to be more focused on that. So it's not like what we have today where there's all this, you know, information flowing all over the place. It was very difficult to get information. And the other thing going on is that if you are the Portuguese, you don't want anyone to know about your roots. So they're going to keep those as like a company secret. And if you let anyone else know about it, if you let the Spaniards or the British know about it, I mean, you'll be executed probably, because it's a fortune of money if you can dominate these trade routes. So the fact that this guy is able to piece this together is quite remarkable, because this is really not bad considering it's only 1507. He even is conjecturing about this ocean, even though we don't know of anyone who actually got to the Pacific Ocean at that point. Balboa and Magellan are not going to do this until I think the year is 1520 or so, 1519, 1520. So who knows how he even knows that North America, South America are separated from Asia. No one has any clue as to how he's going to know that. But yeah, so the fact that this is pretty good, is pretty accurate, is quite a remarkable feat at that time. Okay, let's see what else. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody's questions here. Okay, I did. So let me go back a little bit. Oh, and yeah, that was interesting that Africa and Europe are the center. But considering that, you know, the map makers are actually from Germany. They're from a monastery in Strasbourg, and they're obviously very talented cartographers. They're going to put Western Europe very much at the center. And Africa really gets quite a place in this too, because it's so much part of the story at that time of learning about the world and voyages and such. And the Portuguese, by this point, were able to round Africa and get all the way to India. This is amazingly accurate considering the year. It's only in 1497 that Vasco da Gama is going to get around Africa and make it to India. Now, India still has, you know, this must be India over here, I'm assuming, because I'm looking, yeah, this is probably India. India still has the Ptolemy look to it. It's not quite defined the way it needs to be, but Africa is incredibly accurate. So this is amazing how much was already known about Africa, because again, 1497 is when Vasco da Gama gets all the way around to India. It's only 10 years. So wow, a lot of that information is filtering to others at that time. Let's see some other stuff going on here. The book, Cod, okay, has an amusing comment about one explorer noting in his log that he discovered Hudson Bay. I think, okay, he then adds a footnote that there are many, hang on, many bass boats there trying to, great question. Okay, so the question is about Mark Kurlansky's book, Cod, which I have to say I have not read. I'm in the middle of reading Salt, which probably ties into that in some ways. I've not read Cod, but that's fascinating. And it could very well be that the Basques that would be in northern Spain already were doing some exploring into that area, maybe even to Hudson Bay. I don't know of any other maps prior to the Hudson voyage of that. There were other explorers that went to the opening, to the strait that leads to Hudson Bay, but they didn't quite get in there. These are, of course, official. Like there's a place called Davis Strait. So there was an explorer by the name of Davis who got close to the entrance. He was in an opening area. But as far as I know, as far as I'm aware of, the first maps that we have of the area are going to be coming from post Hudson. Now that's interesting because the Basques and others very well may have gotten in there. I would say we know the tip of the iceberg, no pun intended when we're talking about the North, of course, but we know the tip of the iceberg. There are probably many others that did their voyages secretly or just never made it. And so we're just piecing together the official versions of things, the things that are actually written down and were, you know, eventually released to the world. but there are probably so many other things that we don't know. And this is one of the weirdest of all, because Magellan is not going to get around this area until about 13 years later. So how in the world did they know that there is a Pacific Ocean that extends, I mean, it's smaller than what it really is, but it's there. It could be that there were other secret missions or things where the documentation just isn't there about it. There's so many stories of things that were attempted to be kept completely secret, and then it turns out that others are going to know about it. The Vikings. All right, so let's talk about the Vikings. So the Vikings are going to have their heyday in the 800s, the 900s, 1000 or so. And some of the theories, by the way, about why the Vikings are going to emerge as this powerhouse are that there was a warming period in the Atlantic, or worldwide, called the medieval warming period. So the Vikings were able to spread out. I guess there would be more here, sorry. So here's Scandinavia. So they were able to fan out across the North Atlantic in, let's say, the 900s and such, and they're going to encounter Iceland, they're going to encounter Greenland, and from Greenland, they're going to, kind of blunder into this place, probably on a fishing voyage, and that ends up being today's Newfoundland. And so the Vikings are the first that we know of to encounter, of the Europeans that we know of, to encounter North America. And that will be in the year 1000. It's Leif Erikson and others that are going to set up a place that today is called, I'm going to type it in, okay, so that's where it is in Newfoundland today, and we know for sure that they got there, and they were there for a while, but they did not have a permanent settlement because it was just so isolated, difficult. The climate probably got much less hospitable, and the people, the native people that were living there were, they didn't get along with the native people. So there were lots of reasons why they just packed up and ended up leaving. But they were the first that we know of. There might have been others. There's always theories about, did the Chinese come? Did they, but there's nothing that's been documented. This is something that actually was documented back in the 1960s. So yeah, the Vikings are the first ones to come across into North America, but it's because it's not a permanent settlement that it's a very interesting thing, but it's not the thing that is going to really change the course of, the direction of the Americas and such, the way it will once Columbus gets here. Let's see some other stuff. Please excuse me. Absolutely. Okay. Well, we'll hopefully see you again in 2 weeks then. Thanks for coming. All right. So look, I'm going to check the time while I'm at it. All right. So we still have about a half hour. Great. All right. So let's keep moving and see what else we've got. All right. So talk about changes that happen in the Americas once 1492 occurs. I just put up some random stuff just to, kind of give you the swath of changes that will happen here on this continent and also in South America. So let's take a look. So wheat. Now, wheat today is, a major crop in the United States. It is big business. It has helped our economy for decades and decades. We have bread baskets. It's just such an important part of our economy and our agricultural mix here. So one of the fascinating things about wheat is that it is not from the Americas. It's not native to the Americas. This is something that's going to be a result of the old world and the new world coming together, colliding in some ways and mixing in other ways. And I would say this, I read a book called Seeds of Change. And it talks about the importance of different foods and how they change history. And they very much focus on wheat and the idea that the fact that wheat can grow in North America so successfully, even though it's a newcomer, it's not indigenous, is helping to have the Europeans recreate Europe in North America and become very successful here. And it's a really interesting idea how crops can actually, are part of the story of 1492 and some of the changes that take place. It wasn't that Columbus brought the wheat with him when he came on these voyages, but as the Europeans follow suit, they're going to bring their foods, and their foods grow perfectly well in the United States, in what would be the United States and other parts of North America, and that helps the place to become as populated by Europeans as it could be, which of course then is going to lead to the Europeans dominating here. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Another is this individual. All right, so here's John Wayne and Steve McQueen, and this is a Western. Looks like it might be in Utah or in Arizona where they're filming this. Very nice. And of course, one of the things that we associate with the Western are the horses. But here's another monumental change that's going to, kind of pull the rug out from the Native Americans that are here and so on. And that's that the horse is not native. The modern horse, this size horse, is not native to the Americas. So again, 1492 happens. Eventually, the Europeans are going to become aware of these new lands. They're not Asia. They're not connected to Asia. And little by little, their world is going to be transported to this new place. And part of it, of course, is the horse. And the horse is going to change everything for the world that existed here. Because before the Europeans bring horses, the native population, they did not have a way to transport themselves or their goods easily. They had dogs, and they would have the dogs pull things, but they did not have something to ride on in order to get from one place to another. So the areas where they existed, where they lived, would be a much smaller group. Groups didn't have large territory. But once the horses come about and the native people are going to acquire them, and that's not really going to happen until the 1600s, the groups that can take advantage of this are going to become dominant. And so it's going to change the whole political structure of the Native American world once horses and other animals come on the scene. Does anybody know of, and there are several, does anyone know of a Native American nation that is going to become very, very powerful once they acquire horses? You can just write it down if you think you know it. There are a bunch. Okay. Anybody else? There are two that really stand out to me that become really important. Okay, so let's see. So I see Comanche up there, and Comanche is absolutely one of them. So imagine this, the Comanche, they become really the ruler of the plains, all the way from Wyoming to Texas, if you can imagine that. The Comanche were a very minor group. They were not even, they had no real power. They were just kind of a group that was subsisting by hunting and gathering. They were up by the Red River area in Wyoming, kind of just eking out an existence. Somehow they were able to acquire horses in the early 1700s. Nobody even knows how. Somehow either horses that they either took them from other groups, maybe they were wild, whatever it is, and they became preeminent horse riders and fighters with horses. So this group that was just kind of eking out a marginal existence is going to end up really dominating, especially the Southern Plains, to the point that other groups were in terror from them, other native groups, everybody, Europeans, everyone, Americans, in absolute terror of this group because they were so dominating and they were quite vicious actually when they would capture people as well. They would enslave people, torture people, mutilate, horrible stuff. But they became so powerful only because horses come on the scene for them in the late 1600s and 1700s. So they really upset the whole political makeup of, and of course the social makeup, territorial makeup of the of America, or Native America once this occurs. Another group, definitely the Sioux or the Lakota, which is their other name. The Lakota Indians actually originate in Minnesota. So they're coming from kind of the Lake Superior area in Minnesota. They were driven out by other groups. They were also kind of a marginal group. They were the ones driven out. They also are going to acquire horses and become some of the most dominant groups along the Missouri River into the Dakotas. So again, these major changes happen, but it's only once the Europeans are coming in with these animals that were really old world animals. Here's another fascinating thing about the horse. So there are different types of horses, of course. There are horses that do well in arid climates. There are horses that do well in moister climates. The British would have horses that were just fine in, kind of a mistier, cooler environment. The Spaniards, on the other hand, had developed and acquired horses and horsemanship from the Moors, from Morocco, because of course Morocco had controlled Spain for 700 years. So a lot of the horses that they were using were accustomed to a more arid environment that occurs in Morocco and also in parts of Spain. So when the Spaniards come to the Americas, they're bringing their horses with them. Coincidentally, those horses were perfectly suited for these environments. The British horses would have probably said, I'm done. I need something to drink. I can't do this. But because the horses are coming from Spain, those horses were able to adapt. And therefore, they're going to have a huge effect on the native populations in the plains that are dry and the western part of America, which is dry. So everything was kind of coincidental in that way. But again, it's biology that fits right in to what we have here, just like wheat. The Blackfoot, that's interesting. The Apache, the Blackfoot, yeah, to some extent, those two were also quite powerful. I would say more regionally, the Blackfoot Indians would be up in Montana, in generally the kind of Glacier National Park area. If you ever go up to Glacier National Park, that's where the reservation is today. And certainly they were a force to be reckoned with. They had tremendous issues with the Lewis and Clark expedition and beyond. I would say that the Apache and the Blackfoot, absolutely very, very powerful groups. Probably the most powerful would be the Lakota and even the Comanche more than the Lakota, although all of them adopted this foreign organism, if you want to think of it as this, as it's coming across into America from the Spaniards. And I'll throw in, as we're talking about this, I'll throw in one other thing about this. How do the horses end up in the West? It's not that the Spaniards were not careful about their horses. They did not want the Native Americans to have them because that would give them, more equal footing, and it would have been more competition for the Spaniards in trying to control them, right? So they did not readily share these weapons, really, these vehicles with the Native American population. But what will happen is the Spaniards have a mission in Taos, New Mexico. And they're really subjecting the native population there. The native population is going to revolt. And they're able to drive the Spaniards out of Taos and out of that region of New Mexico into Texas for quite a long time, for I think about 30 years or so. In the interim, they were able to capture horses. during that revolt. The revolt happens in 1680. So that's why that's considered kind of the watershed time for when horses are going to start to spread out to the native tribes. Before then, not so much. They were really very much guarded so that the Spaniards would have control of them. So that's one thing I want to mention about that. You saw a documentary on the Blackfoot routinely having, yeah, that must be fascinating. But even though those things are now part of the culture of the Blackfoot and the Sioux and the Comanche and so on, imagine that it's very recent that that becomes part of the North American landscape. It's only since about the 1700s. It's 300 years or so, 300, 400 years that this has been available to them. The idea of the Plains Indians sweeping down the plains, you know, with war bonnets and such, that's something that really did not happen for a while. It's happening from about the 1700s until, I don't know, maybe about 1860, about 150-ish years until they're on reservations. So it's not something that was part of their lifestyle for hundreds and hundreds of years. They certainly were able to take advantage of that when they could, but it was very short-lived, interestingly enough. All right, let's see what else we've got here. I'm putting apples up here because here's something else which is a newcomer to the Americas. I could fill the screen with dozens and dozens of things that we, you know, associate with our world today here in America, but did not exist until more recent times. So apples, believe it or not, are from Central Asia. They come from Kazakhstan in Central Asia, that the country that is just south of Russia today, near Mongolia, near China, which, by the way, is a hot spot for many of the fruits that we eat today. Pears, cherries, apples, melons, and so on. They're coming from Central Asia. So if you're interested in food history, you want to check that out. It's a fascinating thing. There's actually a really dense book. I wouldn't recommend it if you're looking for nice, you know, pleasurable reading, but if you really want to get into it, Fruit of the Sands is a book that it talks about the origin of many of the fruits that we eat coming from Central Asia. I found that really incredible, despite the fact that the book is, you know, a little bit denser to read. But anyway, all right, so let's look at this. So apples are also something that become newcomers to America, and we can embrace it. We have the climate, the soil that this works with, and that is another way that Europeans are going to be able to bring their world with them and make America work for them. Now, if we think of continents like Africa, that's not the case. Africa has such a different environment that Europeans really had to stay more on the outside. You don't have the same degree of European influence, European population, I should say, migration coming into Africa, because you can't recreate Europe in Africa. So when Europe was colonizing Africa, they usually would have a small population of people. They would have, you know, a colonial government, and they would work with the native people to control the population. But it wasn't that Europeans were flowing in there by the millions, which is what's going to end up happening in America, because you cannot recreate Europe in a place like Africa. The climate will not be suitable for that. So that's another interesting way to look at how 1492 is going to really change things at the environmental level, the biological level, the demographic level for the Americas, but maybe not so much in some other places. Who wrote Seeds of Change? Ooh, I've got to think about that for a second. It might have been somebody by the name of Crosby, but I'm not positive. I read it a really long time ago. But if you just do a Google of that, you'll get it. And it's really interesting. If you're intrigued by food history, which I am, and how that changes the world, you know, that's a good one. There's another one. Oh, there's one called Ecological Imperialism. which gets very much into this idea of what we're talking about. So ecological imperialism, that one is by Alfred Crosby. Ecological imperialism, Alfred Crosby. Oh, another one, I'll type that in for you guys if you're interested, and we'll talk more about this a little later. The huge concept behind 1492 and some of the biological exchanges, meaning food, animals, and diseases, which occurs, is called the Columbian Exchange. And it's a book that's written also by Alfred Crosby. So I'll put down these two. So Columbian Exchange and ecological imperialism. And they're both by Alfred Crosby. I'm not sure about Seeds of Change and who wrote that one, but they all are going to touch upon some of the same ideas of how important food becomes in who's going to be successful, who's going to become wealthy, and who's going to control certain areas, or who wants to control those areas. Okay, so I want to show you another one. So I was talking about food and talking about animals, but also architecture is another fascinating aspect to some of the changes that happen here as we go along. This type of architecture, which you find in many places in the Southwest, is going to be affected by the Spaniards coming. So you can say that this is Spanish style architecture, right? Sometimes it's called mission style or Spanish colonial, that type of thing. Okay, and it has the red tile roof and such, and it has the arches. But can anyone dig deeper even and tell us where this originally comes from, this style? I love this kind of stuff because it's like, you know, on the surface, it's one thing, but then you can get even deeper than that. What does this maybe look like to you? I'm checking to see who else. Fantastic. Isn't this amazing when you think about it, everybody? So this is in probably somewhere in Tucson. Okay, so in Arizona, lots of people have these very beautiful style houses. It has the red tile roof, you know, the terracotta. It has the arches, and you would think most people say, "Oh, this is kind of like the Spanish influence on the area," which it is. But the Spanish are bringing with them their own heritage, and because the Moors, the Muslims from Morocco, controlled Spain for so long, for 700 years, and that's going to play very much into 1492 as well, by the way. The Moors are going to control Spain for so long, they're bringing their food, their language, their architecture with them. So this is really Moorish. If you look at the architectural styles in North Africa, it looks like this, with some variation, of course. You know, they're not going to have the yucca plants and like what we have going on here, but the arches, for sure. This is all Moorish. All of this stuff is coming from North Africa. So, and much of this style as well. So it's amazing how North America is going to change. It's going to change forevermore once 1492 sets many things in motion. And so that's why I wanted to bring kind of this, you know, span of stuff as we go along and talk about these things. Okay, stop. Again, your comments and such are fabulous. Please keep them coming because nobody wants to hear me blabber the whole time. We want to hear from you guys as well. All right, so let's see what else we've got here. So this is a distribution of world population over the last 5,000 years. So I find it very interesting if we keep flowing here. All right, oh, that's fascinating. All right. So why don't we look at this first, this 3,000, and then we'll kind of jump forward to maybe the 1500s and beyond. But if we look at 3000 BC, which would have been 5,000 years ago, look what's going on. There are certain parts of the world that are real centers of population. What do you think they all have in common? What are people doing in those areas in particular that lead to these population centers? Notice where they are. So they're particularly in India here, East China, the Middle East, Mexico. And Mexico, by the way, is the only place in the Americas at that time that have this concentration of population. Anybody? Okay, they're all temperate, cultivation, fantastic. You guys must have studied before you started this class because this is just too much already. I can't believe it. You're absolutely right. So the cultivation, so these are all agricultural centers at that time. The valleys in Mexico, which are very fertile. Agriculture is beginning in the Middle East right here, and it's going to spread into Europe as well. It starts in the Indus River region in India, and it spreads to other parts of India as well, because much of India is quite fertile with the proper water. And of course, East China has some areas like the Yellow and the Yangtze River, which would support big populations. So all of these are places of cultivation. Notice that the Americas, besides that, are not as crowded as some other places because they aren't really centers of cultivation. One of the things, by the way, that I want to mention about the Americas that puts them at a disadvantage, and I would see that by looking at these two, these are really not centers of civilization to the degree of what's happening in Mexico, is that North America, South America do not have the geographic advantages as exist here. So notice this compared to this. And those of you who have ever seen or read Guns, Germs, and Steel, this falls right into that idea, and it's a fascinating idea. Why is it that the Europeans end up coming here instead of vice versa? Well, it's because they were able to develop a rather sophisticated civilization by 1492, by 1450, etc. How come? Well, look at the landmass that exists here. There are so many different pockets of ideas happening throughout this enormous landmass that they're bound to move from one direction to another. And we just talked about that before when we were talking about apples, and we were talking about horses, and we were talking about wheat. So wheat is coming from the Middle East, but Western Europe is going to grab that idea. So is India, and so is China. Horses, does anyone know where horses originally come from? It's quiet. That's not seeing anybody coming on, so I'll let you know. So horses are actually coming from Central Asia, right around over here. So everybody eventually is going to benefit from them. Chinese, the Mongolians, the Indian population, and Western Europe. Okay, everybody can get everybody's stuff eventually. Yeah, they come from Eurasia, or that area that also sometimes called Central Asia, sort of this borderland area. Everybody gets everyone else's stuff. That's a good thing. I mean, it also can invite warfare. That's not a good thing, but there's many, many exchanges that can take place. That's part of the reason why Western Europe can end up being as powerful as it is. They are the recipient of lots of stuff that's developing throughout the landmass. They develop some of their own great ideas. Other things happen in China, India, etc. Everybody can merge to one degree or another and take the best of what's being developed in different places. Now let's go here. Part of the reason why the Europeans were able to come in here eventually and be so dominant, like we're talking about with the horses and the wheat and all that, is also because there were not the degree of sophisticated civilizations up here. It was not that it was open land by any means. There were millions of people living here, but they really did not stand a chance against the Europeans with all that they had acquired over millennia once they get here. And if you look at the geography, it makes some more sense. A lot of things are actually emerging in either Mexico or in South America. because of the climates. They have longer growing seasons than what's happening here. There's more biodiversity in South America and in Central America and Mexico. But the two worlds are very separate from each other. And also another thing I'm going to say is that many of the things that grow here would not do well up here because it's a very different climate. This is a north-south orientation to one degree or another. This is not. So as somebody mentioned, these are all fairly temperate areas. So you could transfer biology from one place to another. Something that grows in the Amazon, it's not going to really fit in many other places north-south. So this is a much tougher geographic situation. And it's part of the reason why I'm looking at population differences. It gets to be more and more astonishing as we go on. All of these become really strong population centers. But as far as the New World is concerned, it's never to the degree of what's happening here. And the sophistication simply can't happen because there's not the degree of exchange of ideas. And also the horses and other very, very useful animals and crops are not in this part of the world. So here's my arrow, in this part of the world. So that's part of what sets the stage up for the Europeans once they really get their act together, Western Europeans, and getting their act together in the 1400s to start really leaving their shores for them to be able to come here and really fairly easily take this entire landmass from the people that were here previous. Let's see some of the other comments that came in here. It's interesting how the 1500 AD map shows the large Inca Empire along the Pacific coast of South America and then much less in the 1600s. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Thanks for bringing that up. Let me get up there. I got to move my stuff over a little bit. Hang on. Oh, you know what? I'm going to move it over to the other side. I'm going to do a little interior decorating here really quickly. So we're looking at 1500s and 1600s. All right, so let's go there. So 1500s and 1600s. Okay, so, all right, so everybody, let's zero in on what's happening here. Notice again, our place, our little part of the world does not have huge population concentration. Doesn't mean it's empty, of course. There are plenty of people here, but nothing to the degree as to what's going on here. So Mexico has a huge concentration that goes down into Central America, and there are the Incas down here along the coast of Chile and into Peru and such. Yep. Okay. So now let's go to the 1600s and see what's going on. It's lighter. It's all lighter. Yep. Absolutely. So what's going on here, it's an absolute tragedy. So between 1500 and 1600, it very much ties into what we were talking about before, about the biology of the old world coming to the new world. So with that is diseases of the old world, things like smallpox. And when smallpox arrives, it's going to decimate the native population. So notice this. You don't see that in many places on here, I don't think, but what's growing, this is a certain color, it's gotten darker here. So the population is growing in Mexico between 1000 and 1500 because civilization is developing. It's getting more and more sophisticated. That must mean that there's more food security, et cetera, for people. People are living longer. But then, boom, we have a demographic collapse of the indigenous population. And it still really isn't replaced with that many people coming from Europe. So it's looking very light. That absolutely is because of disease. When we talk about smallpox, that's directly related to the idea of the animals coming across. So when we're talking about horses and cattle and all these other animals that are really old world animals being shipped across to recreate Europe in the new world, they bring their sicknesses with them. And the people that are associating with these animals, that live right near these animals, work with these animals, they're carriers as well. Even if they have some immunity to the sicknesses, they carry them, they're bringing them to the New World, and they're exposing people inadvertently. They're not going to understand germ theory or any of that. They're just kind of, blundering into this place. And here are these people who have never had any exposure to smallpox or these other sicknesses, and they are dying in droves, sadly. So it's going to be Pizarro, it's going to be Cortez, and many others as they come across into the New World. And it's not just these, formidable conquerors, but any European that comes across is going to be a carrier, most likely, and can easily cause smallpox epidemics to occur. There's even some evidence that by the time the Pilgrims come in the 1600s, the early 1600s, there already were decimated villages in Massachusetts. So if you think about that, we think of it's like, kind of this pristine environment. It wasn't, because the 1600s, the Mayflower coming in the 1600s is already about 150 years after the first Europeans are coming into the New World. By then, smallpox is going to arrive even before the Pilgrims come. So that's why they came into some abandoned villages. I think Squanto was supposed to have been from a group where just about everybody had died already. I mean, this stuff is monumentally horrible, what happened. But when you have two groups that meet up and there's a new, pathogen around, we're going to have problems. I mean, we just lived through that with COVID to a certain degree, right? You can imagine in 1492 what this is going to lead to. Let's take a look. All right. So no written languages in these areas. No, there were some symbolic writings of the Mayans. So that's considered some sort of a glyph that's probably somewhat like a hieroglyph, like what the Egyptians did. That seems to have not really spread beyond the Mayans, though. The Aztecs didn't have it. The Incas did not have it. And certainly the people up in our part of North America didn't have it either. So it leads to the idea that there was really a limited exchange going on, and isolation is not going to be good as far as developing what you have, because everybody ends up sharing ideas and building upon them. Let's see what else. As in lack of sophistication here. Right. Yeah. So there is no written down information. So you can't pass things down by writing. It's going to be more of an oral history. That's going to be the form of communication between one group and another. The Charles Mann book describes it. Yes. So 1491 is a very interesting book. 1492 is a really good book too, that get into some of the effects of disease and such as the Pizarro and others come into these areas. So it really is fascinating. I mean, this is all part of the story of 1492 of people coming into a new place and it literally changing the demographics, changing everything environmentally about the Americas. The Americas that we have today are a very, very different place, just down to the biology, than what would have existed before. There would have been no horses, no cattle, no pigs, no chickens, no donkeys. Many of the plants are going to be invasive. Wheat, many fruits, all of this. It's going to be literally a whole new world. If we think of New World in that way as well, it really is very fitting to what we're talking about. So I know we're running out of time. I want to mention one other thing really quickly. So if we look at, again, it's 1600 and maybe even a little beyond that, notice what's happening to the European population. So it's maybe not obvious, super obvious on here, but one thing I would say is that it's getting more and more intense. It's growing rapidly. And part of the reason for that is, well, people are living longer. People are still having big families in the 1700s as they would have for centuries before that, but people are living longer, and that's going to create this basically a population explosion going on in England and some other places as well. Part of the reason why that population explosion can take place is because of worlds colliding, of having this new place, the Americas, where some really important things are going to be brought back to the old world. And I'm just going to throw them in, and then next time we can start by talking about them. And you probably have some of your own ideas too. So we were talking about what the Europeans brought, but how about this? So I lost my train of thought. What was I going to put down here? Oh, okay. Potatoes, tomatoes, and here, and there are many others that I can put in, but I'll put just some of the big ones that are going to change everything. And how about this one? Peruvian bark. Okay, there's so many we could talk about, but these are going to change diets for people. Especially this, I would say, is going to become the food of the peasants. It's going to give people more food to eat, better food to eat. It's going to give more food variety for people in Russia, people in, all over Europe where that could grow potatoes. Peruvian bark, by the way, is going to be tremendous over time, because Peruvian bark is how we make quinine. So if you think about these new foods coming in and giving people more variety in their diet, especially if they're peasants and they typically don't have, much diversity in their diet, and also medicines are coming in from these new places, it's really going to start to change things for the population. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. In 2 weeks, we're going to get back to talking more about how this really started, what really launched the Columbus expedition and also the Portuguese. But I think we laid the groundwork down with some of these major changes that took place. Anybody have other comments or questions before we head out? Concept of the fertility of margins, the intersection of differences, places, things, estuary. Oh, that is fascinating. Yeah, so places where, I think you mean edges where landscape can change. That's really fascinating. If you think of a place like, I'm thinking of Philadelphia. So Philadelphia is a place that's just where the changes take place, terrain-wise. If you drive through Philadelphia, Old City, where Liberty Bell is, that area is flat. It's by the Delaware River. It is flat. But midway through Philadelphia, that's where you start getting into the foothills of the Appalachians. It starts to be very rolling, cliffs and such. It's quite beautiful, actually, but it's happening right through the middle of Philadelphia. The original part of Philadelphia is going to be right at that edge where the flat is to the hills, because it's at that point that you have to change over the type of transportation that you're going to use. And then another difference is where the river is at the coastline and Philadelphia. So the Delaware River, Old City, Philadelphia, flat, and then the hills. So changeovers are a huge deal as well. They're very important.